Everyone here that's not only here but watching on YouTube. We have a little note. I don't know if any of you saw this through circumstances that I'm not completely sure happened. Our 10-year ban on our Facebook page was reduced. Dwayne appealed it, won the appeal, and it's back on. I guess it was back on Wednesday or Thursday, and so we'll still be able to kind of use both platforms. And so anyway, if you're watching on YouTube and want to give a prayer request for us to pray for at the end, please do that. We'd be glad to do with it. If it's not live, we can pray for it later as we receive the information. We're going to be in Exodus chapter 32 today. Dr. Sharrett is out of town, unavailable at the moment. So I'm filled for him. And when I do, we've been talking about the life of Moses. Exodus 32 finds us post-Exodus. The Israelites escaped slavery in Egypt after a series of 10 plagues. They journey from Egypt to Mount Sinai over a 3-month course. Or during that course of time, what we have recorded during their time in the wilderness is them complaining against God. Twice about water, once about food, which are legitimate things that you need. But the way they complained about it was this. They'd say, hey, I don't know what God is pulling here. He brought us out of Egypt into the wilderness to die of thirst. And in doing so, they were making Egypt, their slavery, their generation of slavery, sound more appealing than what it actually was. Hey, we're out here in the wilderness, and God is trying to starve us to death. As a result, they had plenty of water. They had food descend on them, manna every day, and they had quail because they said, we need meat to eat. So in 3 months, they come to Mount Sinai, and they are there for a little bit longer than what maybe we realize if we're just reading through Exodus sequentially. It starts something like this. They come to Sinai, and Moses goes up on the mountain, and God says, you are going to, I want to make Israel my people. And so Moses is doing a lot of walking up and down Mount Sinai. Moses goes down and says to the people, hey, God wants you to be his people. And they say yes. And this is in Exodus 19. Moses goes back up and he says, you know what, I'm going to meet the people. And I want them to come to the base of the mountain and meet them in 3 days. They need to purify themselves before they meet me. Tell them to not go up on the mountain or they will die. And so Moses goes back down the mountain, tells the people, you're going to meet with God. God is finalizing and formalizing his agreement for them to be his people. And so Moses is going back and forth. He's the intermediary of that. The people come up to the mountain. Moses goes up, makes sure the people don't approach the mountain. And God speaks the 10 Commandments to the people this is my understanding of it. The people hear God audibly speak the 10 Commandments to them. Before then, whenever God had spoken to the people, he spoke to Moses, and Moses relays the message. This is a time where God says, I'm going to speak directly. He directly speaks the 10 Commandments to them, and they respond in fear. They said, we do not want to interact with God in this way. We want Moses to go back to speaking to God for us. We don't want to be directly hearing what he has to say. And so Moses goes up. He hears, the fourth time he goes up, he receives various commandments that are found in Exodus 20, verses 22 through 24. He goes down, gives the people the commandments. They build an altar and sacrifice, and the people vow obedience. They said, yes, we will do all these things that God has said. The 10 Commandments and many more are rules about sacrifice and slavery, property rights. And then in 24, Moses goes back up with Aaron and some others. They are on the mountain for 6 days. On the seventh day, God calls Moses out of the cloud into the midst of the crowd. And Moses is on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights receiving instructions about how the tabernacle is going to be built. And so we're going to be in Exodus chapter 32. And that section, that chapter is in 3 sections. There's 3 parts to it. The first part is what is happening on the base of the mountain while Moses is up there for 40 days and 40 nights. That's the first part. The second part is the conversation that God has with Moses to inform him what is happening with the Israelites at the base of the mountain. So as the Israelites are at the base of the mountain, God says to Moses, let me tell you what your people are doing down there. And the fact that God is calling the Israelites Moses' people and not his people means that it's not good. It's something like this. If my children are acting great and they're wonderful and they're just something to be proud of, it warms the cockles of their hearts. In my family, whose kids are they then? They're Jamie's kids, right? If they're behaving in a manner that is unexplainable, they're behaving badly, and they need correction, whose kids do they then become? They're my kids, all right? So this is what God is saying to Moses. Your people have got out of hand on the base of the mountain. And then they have a conversation in that second part as to what they're going to do with it. And then the third part of it is what comes down. What happens when Moses comes down from the mountain to deal with the people directly as at the base of the mountain. This is one of those, it's the golden calf. They were making the golden calf at the base of the mountain after they had affirmed the 10 Commandments, the law of Moses. Moses was receiving instructions for the tabernacle, and there they were breaking the first 2 commandments of the 10 commandments that they had heard with the voice of God. And so the key questions here as we look at it is, especially this first section, what did Aaron think was going on? Because he was sort of a participant in this. What did the people think was going on? Because it seems to me it may have been something slightly different than what Aaron thought was happening, and what motivated them to do what they did. So we want to read verses 1 through 6. That's the first section of that, and then we'll talk about that before we move on. So Exodus 32, 1 through 6 says this. When the people saw that Moses was delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves to Aaron and said, "Up, make us gods that will go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." So Aaron said to them, "Take off your rings of gold that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron, and he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." And they rose early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Which the rose up to play is a little bit of an interesting translation. I first learned this verse in the NIV version, which says they sat down to eat and drink and rose up to indulge in pagan revelry. So when we say play, we say, well, what are they playing? Are they playing cornhole? Are they playing, I don't know, basketball? Pagan revelry is something much darker. And we will get into in a little bit what it was involved. We don't know for sure. First, we're going to talk about those three questions. What was motivating them to do what they did? Why did they decide, hey, the status quo doesn't work. We need to build an idol, or instruct Aaron to do that. They state this: we don't know what's happened to Moses. He had been their leader, the spokesman for God through this time, and now he was gone. Chapter 24 tells us that Moses was going up to the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. Now, when I go back and read that, the question that I think is, do the Israelites know he's going to be gone for 40 days and 40 nights? Or does Moses just say, hey, I'm going to meet God in the mountain. I'll be back when I'm back. I don't know what it says, but some of the articles that I was reading about people that know that seem to be more studied on this than me said, hey, they knew it was going to be 40 days and 40 nights that Moses was going to be up on the mountain, and it had been 39 and a half days. So they were either a day off or a night off, and if they had waited 12 more hours, Moses would have descended the mountain without all this happening. But he comes down and he says, you know what? They said, well, he's gone. We're pretty sure he died. One person said, having miscalculated the date of Moses' promised return from the mountain, the Jewish people thought their leader had died. Reading between the lines, there may have been a sense where they also thought, not only has Moses died, but there was always this with the Israelites. We want to be like the other nations. And they make symbols, idols for worshiping their gods, while Moses has us worshiping a singular unseen God. And so everyone else is worshiping multiple gods that you can't see. We are the unique, or stick out like a sore thumb. We're worshiping one God that you can't see. And so now's the time, since Moses is gone, we want to fit in. And what the people thought was going on is they said, we want to make an idol. But they did not say, we are making an idol to the one true God. But we're making an idol for the multiple gods that led us out of Egypt. And so in a way, they were breaking the first and the second commandments almost right out of the gate. So if we think back, if you want to go back to Exodus chapter 20, the first couple verses, it tells us about, I want us to just to stop and consider the first two commandments of the 10 that are sort of the foundation for the system of knowing God that they had. The first one is, you shall have no other gods before me. So they were to worship God alone. And the second commandment, which is in verse 4, 5, and 6 of Exodus 20, is overlapping it, but not completely. So the question is, well, let me say this. It's easy to look at idolatry and say, these people have a statue. Maybe it's made of wood, maybe it's made of rock, and maybe it's made of gold. Whatever it is. And this is in their place of worship, and they are worshiping that thing. And when we present idolatry in that way, that kind of worship looks really stupid, doesn't it? We have a statue that we bought on our honeymoon over at our house. At no point did I think that thing has any real power or significance. It's a decoration. It's a knick-knack, really. And so in idolatry, the people did not think, oh, I carved this thing and now this God exists. The idol itself was an image of a being that they believe existed for real. So they are not saying, hey, so Baal was the big one. He was shown as a bull. They were a calf. I don't think it's a coincidence that those two things overlap. They didn't say, hey, Baal is this actual bull that we carved, but this is a representation of the being that we worship. And that's where the second commandment comes in. God tells them, you shall not make for yourself a carved image of any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation, those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. And so the first two commandments say a couple different things. One, you can only worship the one true God, but if you're in worshiping him, you have to worship him your way, which means I cannot make an image of God that I worship. And it's interesting, some people, some different groups apply that in a modern way, in a way that I find real interesting. Some of you go to Amish country, right? And you go into these stores, and have you ever seen an Amish doll? A little doll dressed like an Amish girl? What does that girl not have? Face. That is not a choice for marketing. That is, we do not believe that even a human being should have an image that is completed. There's some parts of Judaism that say you should never make a fully finished statue, painting, and switching back to Amish people, there's kind of known like they don't want this is not still always the case. You're not supposed to take their picture. They're definitely not supposed to pose for a picture, because of some sort of response to the second commandment. My question here is like, how much, I don't know, how much does that have to do with worship? Because in my mind, it is, you do not want to, what's God commanding is do not make an image of him to worship. That's what the second commandment is. And the reason for doing that is anything that you would make as an image to worship God limits an unlimited God. So there are ways in which we think about how we might limit people by only seeing them through one facet of their lives. Okay. I'm trying to think of we're going to pick on Kathy, right? If I said, so Kathy is a big Ohio State fan, am I correct in saying that? My guess is at 3:30, you were watching the game yesterday. People like me say it's too hard to find the game because it's on all these other networks. Kathy, you probably don't make that same complaint too. Or you may say, hey, it's worth it to find where the game is, right? It's worth it for you, all right? So if I said Kathy is an Ohio State fan, that's true, right? Absolutely true. But there are other things that are equally true about it, right? Yeah, you hope so, right? So your mother, grandmother, you are a citizen, you've been involved, you are currently retired, but you have a profession, you're a landowner, right? You used to sit there and list, you can list 15 to 20 things about Kathy that are equally true. But if I just say, Kathy's an Ohio State fan, what have I done with the rest of those things? Kind of throwing them out. And so if I make an image of God, whatever image you want to make, and I don't know what image you would make of an unseen God that would be appropriate, but if you say, you know what, I've taken God and I've reduced him to this one thing, I've limited him. God is, we believe, know to be, he is omnipresent, which means while he manifests himself, he shows up in special ways. He is all places at all times. And so how do you take a being like that and say, I am going to represent him by a statue? God, it's like saying, hey, God knows everything. God knows everything. Not only does he know everything about the present and the past, but he knows everything about the future in a perfect way. But I'm going to reduce him to a wooden statue. God is all powerful. God can do anything he wants at any point. Well, I'm going to put him in a statue. I'm going to limit it in that way. God is eternal. Has always existed, will always exist, does not have a beginning or an end. The more we stop and think about it, the harder it is for our brains to even try to conceive. And so the idea is we should not try to limit him to a statue, an image. And for the most of us, I mean, we're tempted by a lot of different things, right? Most of it's not like, hey, I need a statue to help me worship. If we had some sort of, in most world religions, the major ones in the United States do not involve that sort of thing. And so the larger question is, am I, in other ways, reducing who God is? Am I limiting him, what I think he can do in my own life? And am I worshiping the way that he wants me to? We should know, though, when we talk about idolatry, that I just want to reaffirm that it was not something where they thought that this God came into this being that they're worshiping incorrectly came into existence when they created this idol. 1 Corinthians 10, 19, 20 talks about separating the idol from the beings that are being worshipped. 1 Corinthians 10, 19, 20 says, Paul saying, what do I imply then? This is about food sacrificed to idols and whether you should eat it or not. What do I imply then? That food offered to idols is anything, or that an idol is anything? No. He's saying no. That statue is nothing. And when you sacrifice a cow to it, that piece of roast beef doesn't have any meaning. But he says, no, I imply that when the pagans sacrifice, they offer to demons and not to God. I do not want you to be participants with demons. He's saying this piece of wood, this piece of rock is nothing, but behind it there is worship, which is demonic in nature. And so we would not say, if we're talking correctly about when the Bible talks about idolatry, that they're worshiping nothing when they bow down to a piece of wood or stone, but they're actually worshiping demonic powers. And so when talking a little bit more about graven images, one of the features of worship in this context was the construction of an image to represent or to embody the deity they were worship. In some instances, this image stood as a place where the deity stood or sat. The Israelites' request to Aaron to make gods that did not mean that Israel believed that the deity's existence began when they built an image, or on the contrary, they believed that the image represented the deity. In other words, the image served as a tangible symbol of Yahweh's presence. But they were worshiping in a way that God told them not to. There's another article I read. By representing Yahweh as a bowl, the Israelites portrayed Yahweh just like the surrounding nations portrayed their gods, making him just another god amid a plethora of ancient Near Eastern gods. As the one true God, Yahweh was unlike any of the false gods. Therefore, he expected his people to approach him in a manner that differed significantly from neighbors as a holy nation. The other thing about worshiping with a physical object is that it mimicked pagan worship in that it would lead people to believe that they could control the deity. So pagan prayers were like this. It was like a magic, prayer to them almost had a magical quality. If I say the right words, it's going to unlock the power of this deity to benefit me in the way that I want. So think of it like your password for your email. If I put the right thing in, I'm in. If I don't, I'm not. The PIN number to your ATM. If I hit the right thing, the cash comes out. If I don't, it doesn't. Worship does not work that way. And then idols and amulets and other things would let people believe that that's the way that God worked, and it didn't. And so idolatry, this is what was going on when they offered this golden calf, and it was just almost unthinkable when you stop and consider what they did. So the people thought they were making a representation to gods that had brought them out of Egypt. They broke the first and second commandments, not even weeks after they had been given them. And when it says they ate and drank and they engaged in pagan revelry, it means that is likely means that there was even a sexual, immoral aspect to the worship. Now, what Aaron said was going on is, hey, I built a calf. I did break the second commandment. But he said, tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord, singular, the one true God, not plural. So he presumably wanted the worship to be to Yahweh, but clearly in a way other than what God had outlined to them. A calf is because that's what looked like the other people around. And it was a test case for commandment number 2. And that is to worship God the right way. And so that's the first part of it, largely disappointing. The scene shifts up in verses 7 through 14 to what the Lord says to Moses. As this is going on, the Lord said to Moses, go down, for your people, who you brought up out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way I've commanded them. They have made for themselves a golden calf, and they have worshipped it and sacrificed to it, and said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And the Lord said to Moses, I have seen these people, and behold, they are a stiff-necked people. Now, therefore, let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them in order to make you a great nation. Moses implored the Lord his God and said, O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt with a great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, with evil intent did he bring them out to kill them in the mountains and consume them from the face of the earth? Turn your burning anger and relent from this disaster against your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self, and said to them, I will multiply your offspring as the stars of the heaven, and all this land that I have promised I will give to your offspring, and they shall inherit it forever. And the Lord relented from his disaster they had spoken of bringing on his people. God is saying these people have corrupted themselves by making themselves an idol. And Moses, I am going to just start over with you. Which, by the way, Moses mentioned the promises of God. God could have fulfilled all his promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob by starting over with Moses. He could have done that. And if you think about Moses, Moses later is described as the most humble man on the face of the earth. There's part of us that would say, oh, everything's starting over with me. Everyone in God's people is related to me might have liked that. Moses said, God, I don't want you to do that. Please don't do that. In fact, if you do that, the very things that the Israelites have been accusing you of, bringing them out into the desert to die of thirst or water, of wiping them out, if you do this, that will be true. And not only will that be true, but when people consider your name, Moses made this about God, when people consider your name and your honor, it will be diminished if you do this. So please don't do this. And it's interesting, the freedom with which Moses speaks to God. God says, hey, these are your people. You brought them out of Egypt and you brought them here and they're out of hand. And Moses says, God, these are your people who you brought out of Egypt. You made promises to them. Please don't do this. And to think that a human being, while still maintaining his respect and reverence for God, can be that bold should probably tell us something about the way we can pray if we choose to. And this conversation makes me think about prayer and why we should do it, and some of the complexity surrounding it as well. So consider this. Did God know that the Israelites were going to build a calf at the base of the mountain before they did it? Yes. So was God surprised by this action? Not at all. Did God know beforehand, did God know 1,000 years beforehand, as he was talking to Moses, that I will not in this moment destroy the entire Israelite nation minus Moses? Did God know he wasn't going to do that as he was saying it? I believe, yes, he knew that he was not going to, in the end, destroy all these people. Because we believe that God has something called foreknowledge, meaning God knows all things perfectly in advance. And so with this in one hand, on the other hand, consider this. Does it seem like God is interacting with Moses and the people in real time? Like, I've seen this and I'm deciding this. And Moses says, hey, I know that this is what you've decided, but I want to advocate for these people and change their mind. Does it appear that that is the case, knowing that God has foreknowledge? Do both things appear to be true at the same time? To me, they seem to be true. Both things seem to be true. How? How can both things be true? And the answer to that, how, is I'm not entirely sure. But I am comforted that God is control and completely control the future. And I also believe that when I pray and ask him for something, that makes a difference. The Bible teaches that both things are true. The Bible said, Jesus says, you have not because what? You ask not. Jesus says, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find. What happens when you don't ask? What happens when you don't seek? And so it'd be easy to say, well, God's got it all figured out. He's got it all planned out. He knows everything. And maybe my prayers don't make a difference. Maybe my interceding for other people doesn't make a difference. But throughout the Bible, it says these two things are complementary. God knows everything. It's all powerful. He knows what's going to happen. He knows what he's going to do. And he also wants us to ask him. And in asking him, that can make a difference. In Jesus, also in Moses, we see someone interceding for us in a way that is powerful. We're not going to get into that. I want to end with this, though. When Moses comes down from the mountain, to the people, what does he do? He does two. He breaks he busts them. That's the first thing he does, and I just want to end with this. It reminded me of this thing that happened decades before I was at college at Mid-Atlantic Christian University. Decades and decades before, there was a engaged couple, and lots of couples get engaged in Bible college, and those engagements don't always last for whatever reason. But there was this couple that was engaged, and running along our campus was a river that drained into the Sound, which was the Paspatank River. And because there were cedar trees that were right next to the river, kind of in the river was a dark, stained, dirty brown. And all the time you look at the water and you're like, I do not want to go in that water for any reason whatsoever. It is bad. You can't see anything. It stinks. If you jump in, you don't know what's below. In fact, in our student handbook was do not swim in the river. All right. So you got an engaged couple. You've got a river, and this young man comes up and says to his then fiance, I don't want us to be married anymore. I'm breaking off our engagement. It's done. And the then young lady removed her ring, and what did she do? Chucked it. Does it make any sense for her to do that? No. She takes it, she throws it. I would like to know how far it goes, and it sinks into the bottom of the dirty, low visibility Paspatank River. And she's saying, this ring, which symbolizes the promise of a life for us to make together, it's as gone as that life that we promised. And Moses, when he says, here is God's 10 Commandments spoken in your own voice, you agreed to it as sort of the charter of us, of you and us as God's new people, and you've broken it before we can even leave the wedding venue. He says, I'm just going to smash them. That's how egregious this violation of the commandment is. And so it's an interesting thing to do. He does other things, which we'll talk about next time Dr. Sharrett's gone. He grinds up the gold, and he makes the people drink it. And then some other things ensue. So we'll stop there. I think the takeaway for us is we have to worship God in the way he commands us to, and we cannot try to limit him because he is limitless, whether we acknowledge that or not. So let's see, are there any prayer requests, Roger? Nope? All right. Let's close in prayer. Dear Father, we thank you for today. Thank you for all the ways you love us and care for us, and I just pray that we will, as we look at these stories so long ago and in a world that we don't always relate to and can't understand, I pray that we worship you in spirit and in truth in the way that you have desired. I pray that we will seek you as a Father who loves us, that will never try to control you with our prayers, but that we will instead trust that you are good and you are just. Be with us today, and I thank you for your love. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.